All right, guys, welcome. Today we are going to be dealing with the faith and sort of legacy of John Quincy Adams. This whole series, I just want to reiterate, it's really about the way that faith has played a role in the public sphere from the presidency, just because it's the highest office in the land, and sometimes it has done that. So our purpose here is not to try to force it into something that isn't there. It's to examine what has actually already occurred.
Right.
And there's an interplay, I think, between the presidency and the way that the nation is led, and the standards that are set, and the way that people react, and in fact who the people are electing to become president of the United States. And I think that's going to be more of an issue later, right? Because of populism and these sorts of things
Well,
that come up.
and
But
from our Christian standpoint too, we have to have that understanding that whoever is elected, regardless of which party,
mhm,
and part of respecting the office and that sort of thing is, as a Christian, we believe that God allowed that person to be elected,
right,
even if they're not the person that we would have chosen.
correct,
You know,
yeah.
so
And I think that this John Quincy Adams is an interesting individual for a lot of reasons. He just is. He ends up as head of the American Bible Society for
right,
one. So if you want to talk about the interplay of faith and
right,
politics, this is an issue for him, but I don't think he does it in a way that fits a fundamentalist agenda,
no,
and he also doesn't do things in a way that fits a liberal agenda.
right,
He sort of charts a middle course. I would suggest in a similar way that Washington did almost. I
right.
mean, so because he grows up in a Puritan household
Right. Well,
because of his
the
father.
universalist Puritan. Yeah,
Sure, but for a little bit he migrated toward the more conservative bent,
right.
and then sort of found his way back toward the middle again.
Probably a backlash as to how he was relating to his father. It's probably a little bit of
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. So, sixth president of the United States, 1825 to 1829. There's a lot of things going on in the 1820s. We dealt with that previously with James Monroe, and the era of good feelings and
Right.
everything. But there's sort of something else going on in the background. And so, as we're getting into him, if we could just want to back up just for a moment, because so there were some movements that were sort of beginning in earlier presidencies that didn't, I don't think, have an impact yet,
Right.
but they're beginning to. And one of those is sort of like the preaching of George Whitefield,
Right.
the various circuit riding preachers. So the movements that began in England,
Yeah.
you
The
know,
Wesleyans and that movement. John
correct.
Wesley,
John Wesley,
Charles Wesley.
and Brother Charles, and then George Whitefield, and they were moving around and preaching, and you end up with lots of we would call them sort of revival meetings or tent meetings,
Right.
I guess, at that
Whitfield would be
time.
out in a field. He
Correct.
had this voice that carried, and people could hear him.
Hmm.
Um, I've always kind of seen myself as Whitfield's a good example for me because I have a voice that
Yeah, your
projects in
voice
that
does
way.
carry.
So
And he was out there on I think what we would consider to be the fringes of the frontier at that moment.
he's sort of your
He's
first
very rural.
revival movement.
Yeah.
Like to actually call it that. When
Hmm.
like Johnson Edwards and those guys, they wouldn't have said this is a revival.
Right. Correct.
We know that it is, but
Correct.
Whitfield, it's intentional.
That's
I mean,
right.
that's what he's aiming at.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Edwards, I don't think he doesn't have an intention other than to, I think what he would have said, just to preach the word of God, and
Right.
then things happened.
And wake people up.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Whitefield is purposely trying to.
He's an evangelist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's an evangelist. He's purposely trying to get people to see Jesus as Lord.
Right.
And he's preaching morality and all the rest because he's connected to Wesley, right?
Right.
Even though they do have some differences in
There's some
theology,
theological differences. Yeah.
but Wesley is preaching he's part of sort of the holiness movement, right? Where you have to
it comes as a
live
result
a
of
certain
the
way.
Puritans in the Puritans in the Church of England wanting to make the church better. Wesley creates the method.
Correct.
And so in a sense, you're still Anglican, but you're following these prescribed the method.
That's right. That's right.
So
And Whitefield wasn't quite lined up with that, but he was sympathetic to it, and and his I think his rigorousness, the rigorousness of John Wesley, is what got Whitefield fired up.
yeah,
And
encouraging.
yeah, and so you can think of like the early missionary movements, which are beginning at this time, and
They crossed denominational lines when they got on the field.
correct.
Right.
They weren't so concerned about those differences when they weren't at home.
Right.
And so Whitfield's doing this, and he's preaching to the edges of civilization in America, and the population in those regions are starting to grow, and the seeds that were left behind are expanding to such a point that in the 1820s, the movement that Whitefield began
Right.
is starting to have an impact.
Arguably, with that in mind, our next president after Adams, Andrew Jackson, who we're going to be getting to, he would be from that region, getting into the frontier and,
Correct.
The region that's beyond. He's our first president from outside of the original 13, so to speak.
Yeah.
Technically he's in it, but anyway, that's kind of a long story.
Correct. But so let's just now rewind the clock a little bit. So it's my understanding that when he's 10 years old, he's traveling with his father,
right,
in Europe, and that exposes, to the second president, John Adams, and it gave him, I think, a perspective on things that few people in that day would have had.
Right.
He's experiencing politics, diplomacy, other religions, and ways of thinking. There's monarchies, and
he's getting the grand tour at a time when people weren't taking grand tours.
That's right.
He's doing it.
People didn't vacation in Europe,
right,
at the time.
Too many wars.
That's right.
Too many wars.
That's right. And he's seeing it on the front lines, and I think that sets something in him for the way that the world works,
right,
and in a positive way, I think.
Adams had great aspirations. That's something we're going to probably get to.
Mm-hmm.
He's the best. He's the best president to classify as would have been, because most of the policies that he had in mind did not happen, but they were really good.
Yeah.
Had we implemented them,
yeah,
it would have been pretty good.
So every time I think of John Quincy Adams, I can't help what comes to my mind is the movie Amistad.
Okay.
Right, just because of I don't know. It always stands out to me, and I think it probably should, that aspect, just because of John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and their abolition to slavery. Right. That issue was so important to them.
Right. I think John Quincy Adams, hands down, has to be the most vocal of the early abolitionists. He's the one. Like, if you're looking for the guy who is promoting abolition early, it's John Quincy Adams.
And what's so a lot of them say, like Thomas Jefferson, which again, I like Jefferson. I don't know what I've done in his situation. I would have hoped I would have done what was right, but it's you have to make some sort of apology for the fact that he still owns and sold slaves during his life
and had relations with slaves.
Correct.
Yeah.
But John Adams and John Quincy Adams, no such thing.
Right.
So they are just, you can't fault them in any way.
Not for that.
Not for that anyway.
Maybe a tiny bit of hubris for
sure.
John Adams, but
Dad was a little bit more full of himself, I think.
Yeah, a little bit, just a little bit,
than John Quincy. But what's interesting about that is I think that he felt, John Quincy, when we look at some of his speeches and writings, it seems like he felt that it was absolutely the will of God that slavery would be abolished.
Yeah.
it was obnoxious, and in that way he was similar to his father in his outspokenness in that, except he went even further
Right.
to the point of, at post-presidency trying to rid
Yep.
the world of slavery.
He's our only president to take on the role of a representative after being president,
Mhm.
and to continue to be on the House floor making speeches to the day he dies, literally.
Yeah, and
Um,
continually putting up uh, bills to abolish
abolish slavery.
slavery,
Right.
which didn't make it, obviously.
That's a level of conviction, I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because some people, I think, didn't. They thought it was beneath the presidency, and you shouldn't run for that office and do that after the fact. And he didn't understand why.
Yes.
He didn't get it. Anyway, I think he was a true public servant in that sense, because he obviously didn't need to do it at that point in his life. He had already achieved the highest level of political success and that a person could get at that time, other than being a king. Um, so it,
I mean, he'd been a diplomat to Russia. He's
yeah.
the our only president that could speak fluent Russian,
Wow, I didn't
as
know
well
that.
as other languages.
Yeah,
He's known as a polyglot. He could speak many languages.
sure. He was highly educated.
I'm told that he would learn and recite scripture in
Hmm.
several languages every day. You know,
Well, he did he. So his and I mentioned before that he was head of the American Bible Society. Um,
which would publish translations, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And especially for the use of missionaries and such. And but
Is that still in existence?
yes.
Which I guess my question is, which translation are they involved with today?
No, well, they would be part of the background for many
Oh,
translations.
they're just publishing in general,
Sure, they would be
whatever.
part of the framework
Right.
for the transmission of Scripture.
Gotcha. Okay.
Sort of almost like United Bible Societies.
So it's not like Zondervan having the NIV
No, no,
or
no, no,
something like that.
no. This
Okay.
would be the background for all of it.
I gotcha.
And he was heavily involved in that, and he really liked the Bible. I mean, and he was head of the American Bible Society, right? So that goes without saying, I guess. But I'll give you a quote here. He's writing to his son.
Which one?
I don't remember which son it is now, but this is in 1833. Okay, so this is 4 years after the presidency.
Yeah.
He said, "So great is my veneration for the Bible that the earlier my children begin to read it, the more confident will be my hope that they will prove useful citizens to their country and respectable members of society." Also, same year, the Bible is the book of all others, to be read at all ages and in all conditions of human life, not to be read once or twice through and then laid aside, but to be read in small portions every day. So he had this habit, not only of reading in various languages, but doing it every day. Like he
Right.
thought that was the way that it should work.
I often wonder how much sleep he got. You know,
A lot of these guys, I don't know how they slept at all.
Napoleon, contemporary, if you will,
Hmm.
was known to get a spot on the spot 3 hours a night. It was good for him. And John Quincy Adams has kind of a track record of doing things like memorizing scripture. And so to me, sometimes I wonder how much
Right.
sleep did he actually get?
Right.
You know,
So let's talk about sort of his rise. I mean, he's growing up as a president's child. Um, I don't know what that's like. Not many people do.
from everything I've seen or read, he struggled, at first with that because sort of in his father's shadow, if you will, not living up to the expectations. And I
Yeah.
think there was an issue with the first courtship and some things like that.
Hmm.
Um, I think he struggled a little bit with that relationship at first. I think that warmed later in life.
Let's see. Um, so you want to just jump into the presidency itself?
I mean, you can't really do that without talking about the election.
Let's do that.
Yeah. So before we talk about the election, we've got to go into how democratic was
Hmm.
America at the time, and arguably our first 6 presidents, including Adams, they're voted for by white male landowners.
Correct.
There was, in most states, there was a prerequisite that you own lands.
Hmm.
At the time of Monroe and Adams, you're starting to see state legislatures get rid of that.
Hmm.
So Adams still benefits from being under that old setting,
Yeah.
but the very next election is no longer there.
Hmm.
All but maybe 2 of the states have gotten rid of that qualification.
Right. Yeah.
So
The expansion of voting rights
they would call
is
it white universal white male suffrage or
right.
something like
Right.
that.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
manhood. Yeah,
Yeah. The expansion of voting rights is happening. It's not complete as it is today, but it
right.
was.
Well, by Jackson's election, when he actually gets elected, because we're going to talk about that, but
Mhm.
it's there. Like Jackson is voted for by the white males of the country.
Right.
Um, Landowners are not.
Hmm.
But John Quincy Adams would be the last one to be
Yeah.
voted on by the elite, if you will.
Sure.
So,
Okay. So
so the election,
yeah.
it's widely known as the corrupt bargain.
Hmm.
Now, whether it was or not, we don't know. There's some sort of what people would think of as fishy things that take place after the fact. No one had a majority. So in the Constitution, when you don't have 51% of the vote, they've got to go to the House of Representatives to break any ties.
Hmm.
In this case, it wasn't even a tie. Jackson, by and large, had the highest number of votes. He had, I want to say, 38%.
Hmm.
Again, not a majority, but the most votes. They look that up. Anyway, it may be Adams that had 38 and Jackson had a little more than that. There were 4 candidates that were of note in the election. You had Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and I believe John C. Calhoun. And Henry Clay is an important part of
Hmm.
this whole discussion. Um, Adams had been Secretary of State under Monroe. And of course,
Correct.
Monroe had been Secretary of State under Madison. You keep
Right.
going back. Secretary of State.
It's the platform to get to the next
It
level.
was a pedestal. I think if we were trying to look for what it is today, I'm not sure what we would
Vice
say.
presidency,
A lot of
kind of.
times,
Yeah.
vice presidency. Sometimes 4-star general. I mean,
Hmm.
but back then, the Secretary of State was the spot,
Yeah.
and Adams had that. And then when the election takes place, they had to get a consensus from the House of Representatives to get a mandate to mandate's not the right word. They had to come to an agreement to get a president. And so Henry Clay, who happens to be the Speaker of the House,
Hmm.
which means he's the guy that gets to count the votes. He's the one that
Yeah.
gets to make the announcements, all that sort of stuff. He announces Adams as the winner. He hands his electoral votes to Adams,
Right.
and thereby giving him the majority that he needs.
Right.
And Adams wins the election via the House of Representatives, choosing him. Uh, and Henry Clay is the one who offered up the votes. Now, later on, Henry Clay winds up Adams's Secretary of State.
Right.
So the question is did they plan it ahead of time? Jackson says yes. Everybody else says, we don't know.
Right. So and Jackson sort of,
He calls it the corrupt bargain.
yeah, and he maintained that.
Right.
It wasn't a flurry at the time of election. Jackson maintained that belief, as far as I know, for forever.
For life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a very dirty election.
Hmm.
A lot of
There's like mudslinging
mudslinging.
more than happened before.
Jackson's being called a murderer.
Hmm.
Not entirely untrue.
Right.
He's involved in lots of duels.
Yeah.
Also, he's out there on the frontier, involved in massacres. You know,
Hmm.
you name that sort of thing. Um, there's some stuff that's being slung back at Adams
Hmm.
about infidelities with Russian dignitaries and this and
Right.
that.
Right.
Um,
But you don't know how much of this is just political yammering or
and
reality.
what was real, right?
Yeah.
And Jackson was married to a lady named Rachel, and Rachel was married to someone else. And on the frontier, well, whenever a divorce would take place, there wasn't a um, there weren't valid legal proceedings that took place.
Right.
And so her husband had been gone for a long time.
Mm.
And so she was assumed divorced, but not actually,
Not legally.
not legally. And so Jackson married her about a month or two before all of that was finalized. And so he gets called a bigamist.
Right. Right.
They never He never forgave anyone for that. Anybody who was involved in trashing Rachel in any way, Jackson never forgave them. And Adams, because he's the beneficiary of that.
Mm-hmm. He was on the receiving end then of Jackson's
Because,
ire.
and honestly, when we look at John Quincy Adams, to call him corrupt is hard.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly. So that's the difficulty that I have with it. I understand that there's the
or Henry Clay for that matter. Henry Clay is known as the great compromiser.
yeah.
Maybe slightly like he's
Yeah.
political, of course, but
Well, Andrew Jackson could have just had something in his craw and made it up and thought
well,
there's
he
no way
certainly
possible.
did.
There's no way possible that I couldn't have won this.
Right.
Other people could have lied to him about who they were going to vote for or whatever. You just
Well, he did have the most votes, most electoral votes, most. He just didn't have enough to secure the win.
Yeah.
So from his perspective, he's probably thinking, well, the coalition should have went with me.
Right, because that's what the people did.
Yeah, the people have spoken, is
Right.
what Jackson would say.
Right. But the method constitutionally was what happened.
Right.
So
it is something that we have endeavored to repair, though, because we had the problem before. We had the tie between Jefferson and Burr, and they came in and they fixed that. And then after this incident with Jackson later on, we're of course going to get amendments to repair that to where we have vice presidential running mates now.
Yeah.
When I'm not sure exactly which one of the amendments that comes from, but I mean, we even go to the point of limiting the president to 2 terms.
Right.
So
yeah.
It's been something that we didn't really think was fair from the beginning that we had to fix. So from Jackson's standpoint, it's not entirely wrong. I mean, turn around 4 years later.
But the law is the law in the way that it was at that moment.
But it seems that Henry Clay shifted some things, and
well, he might have played the game, I mean, and that's not out of the question still today about the way that they go out and drum up votes,
right,
and do what they need to do to make that happen.
So incidentally, Jackson's accusations are going to stick, though, because Henry Clay is a 4-time candidate and never a winner.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. I think once labels have been created and people accept that label, you're done.
Right.
There's nothing you can do about it anymore. No matter your qualifications or whether or not any of those things are true or false.
Right.
It's just the way that it is.
And it's sort of sad for Adams because he's our second 1-term president. And the fault is not largely his in the way that his father,
Yeah.
John Adams the first, if you will,
his own doing.
He made some mistakes.
Sure.
I mean, he was the victim of the situation, but he made some mistakes.
Well, he signed things into law he shouldn't have.
Right.
And
but
so
they were expedient at the time.
Yeah.
And John Quincy Adams, on the other hand, had great ideas that were overshadowed by this funky election, and he was not able to implement all these great plans that he had, such as national observatories and national university, things like that.
Right.
That would have been
the expansion of education. He was a advocate for lots of things that other presidents didn't seem to be interested in at all.
I mean, look at where we're at in science now, and just speculate where we would be if Adams had been able to do
to create these institutions that early.
Right.
Yeah, it would have been a huge difference. So,
but he doesn't have a mandate, and that's the problem. The people are not actually behind it.
Yeah.
and it goes throughout the entire presidency.
Yeah, it's funny though because you would think that if the House did elect him correctly,
Right.
and it wasn't a whatever happened,
Yeah.
it wasn't the corrupt bargain, then
The will of the people would be represented.
sure, and that the House would also go along with what
Well,
Adams thought,
I guess that's kind of
in his.
the other part of this is you have the division of political parties that's occurring.
Mhm.
The Federalist Party's gone. John Quincy Adams is a Democratic Republican.
Yeah.
They start to split that into two at this point.
Mhm.
And you have John Quincy Adams is known as a national Republican.
Mhm.
And this is when Andrew Jackson starts not this election, but the very next one, we call it the Democrat Party,
Yeah.
which is the one that's still around today.
Yeah.
You and I was listening to a podcast on the way over. Apparently Martin Van Buren's the one who actually made that happen, who was Jackson's,
Really,
you know,
I didn't realize that.
guy in the back corner over here doing this
Okay,
stuff, but
behind the scenes guy.
yeah.
Hmm. So as far as jumping in, he's elected,
Right.
corrupt bargain or no. What do you think are some major events that happen during his presidency? By the way, just as one aside before we do that, if this was a corrupt bargain, I think that reflects poorly. It just does. It reflects so poorly upon John Quincy Adams, being that he was insistent upon a high degree of morality
Right.
of the citizens of the United States.
I don't think there was
So
any collusion, to be honest with you. I mean, I think if you look at the
I think this was
situation,
just a Jackson thing.
well, Jackson is obviously spinning it.
Hmm.
But
Clay may have had a.
again, Jackson's not wrong either. I mean,
Yeah.
he did have
Do you
the
think it was
most
just
votes.
because that's just the way the law was, and.
I think Adams accepted it for what it was.
Yeah,
This is how this is going to play out. This is what the Constitution
sure, but
says.
he didn't bow out or anything.
He didn't. No, of course not. Of course not. You're not going to let Jackson win. Jackson's
Yeah,
to their mind would be kind of a ruffian.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. Because he was a, at least personally, in his attitude, the way that he spoke, whether he spoke to Congress through letters or to his own family in letters, whatever that is, he spoke a lot about moral accountability, and that we are accountable for our morality
Right.
and the way that we act, and
And I
and
think that's John Adams as well. I think his father would have felt similar on
correct.
that.
I think so too, and that in the background because of that Puritan background, that sense of divine providence
Right.
was still lingering there in the background.
John Quincy Adams is kind of where we're starting to see the turn, if you
Mhm.
will. That Polk's gonna is it Polk?
Yeah,
They
Mexico.
they label it the great nation of futurity.
Uh-huh.
We're starting to see that with Adams,
Yeah,
and I think if Adams had been able to do those things, it would have been awesome.
yeah.
But I think that he was mired by this, and I can't think of any one particular thing that happens while he's president that was actually something he wanted to achieve.
Hmm.
I think most of his great achievements come
Post-presidency.
well and prior, but yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something we probably ought to mention is
Mhm.
a lot of the successes of Madison and Monroe are on
Are
Adams's
due to
shoulder.
Adams, yeah.
Yeah, he was a Secretary of State under Monroe, and so all of the things that happened, the building of the National Road up in New York, the Erie Canal, all the national projects, Adams is behind those.
Hmm.
We gained Florida.
Hmm.
That's kind of both Adams and Jackson.
Right.
Jackson blunders into Florida.
Hmm.
Adams negotiates the treaty because he's a good diplomat. He's a
Right.
wonderful diplomat.
Right.
And
Which makes
Adams,
sense because of his world travels, even from whenever he was young. So he probably had a better idea of how to present things in a social standing like that.
right,
Diplomacy was
well, he
just
certainly knows how to treat the monarchies of Europe
right.
and Denmark and Russia, to be specific. He was very instrumental there. Um, he, what was I going to say?
Um, let's just is there something that happens you think during the you can't
Oh,
think
yeah,
of a
that
major
reminds me. So yeah, the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe
Mhm.
Doctrine is largely, it's called the Monroe Doctrine because James Monroe is president. He presents it in Congress,
yeah,
but it's Adams that wrote it.
right.
So in reality, it's the Adams Doctrine,
Hmm.
and it has to do with the diplomacy and the way that we handle Europe.
Hmm.
Who better to come up with that than John Quincy Adams, who's
Right.
been on the field doing the
So
job?
so you think he comes up with this largely because he does understand the monarchical viewpoint?
Yeah, I think he also understands that for the United States to survive and thrive, we've got to work within that system somehow.
Yeah,
And we need to be sort of tough in order to pull that off.
yeah.
Because if we don't present a strong front, then they're just going to come in and take us over
Hmm.
again.
And so it's very interesting. I was listening just recently too to some maybe it was another podcast, but uh, we're talking about the U.S. is I think the longest uh, running democracy in the world that still has its basis in the same document.
Right. The oldest Constitution. Yeah.
Correct. Uh, it hasn't been trashed and started over or whatever.
And we've only got, what, 28 amendments?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And 10
That's
were the first year.
right.
So
That
18
speaks
that are new.
volumes, I think, about the way in which these things were thought through.
Right.
Or debated, I should say. Compromises dealt with
Right.
these sorts of things. I mean, obviously, we did have a civil war still, but nevertheless, we still ended up with the same document running everything. Right.
Largely altered by that war.
Hmm.
And that's a significant thing we're going to have to
Yeah.
get into. But I think in terms of that, we have to get into Adams's stance on back to the stance on slavery because that's
Hmm.
his major accomplishment, if you will.
Yeah.
He's the first person out there actually suggesting an immediate end to slavery, not
Hmm.
not a gradual one. Let's
Right.
get rid of this.
Yeah, because England said, "Well, we're going to do it, but
Yeah.
we're going to pay the slave owners."
Well,
And
you had William Wilberforce and all the stuff that takes place with that. It's
mhm.
like 1810.
Yeah,
So they're done. And
yeah,
Canada was a few years, I think 1796. They were
hmm,
before that.
yeah.
Oddly enough, the one of the characters in the TV show Turn, he's just like the villain, but he was actually the leader of Canada at the time
Hmm.
when they abolished slavery. So
Interesting.
it is kind of interesting that they made him
Huh.
such a villain in that show. Um,
So, as far as like big issues that were going on in the U.S., what's happening here? Are we just sort of coasting along for these 4 years?
I think that it's still the wave of the era of good feeling.
Hmm.
And we're moving into the age of Jackson because that with the corrupt bargain, that's the beginning of that.
Sure.
So it's really overshadowed.
Which I think when we get to Jackson, yeah, we'll bring up some of this stuff again. I think because that's the I guess it is not maybe it's the impetus for his ferociousness and
Yeah,
getting
the
done
Jackson
what he
man,
thought he needed to get done.
Jackson is a tough figure, and the thing about it is we look at him today. It's a lot of negative because our personal perspectives
Hmm.
see those things in a bad light.
Yeah,
But when you look at what was going on, that's what the people wanted. The people that are voting, that's what they're voting for.
yeah.
They hands down wanted Jackson because what the corrupt bargain is what
Well, that's what
1824,
Henry Clay. I mean, that's what Jackson said before too.
right?
When John Adams should not have been president from his point of view.
Right.
That's
Well,
what
no, he
people
should have
wanted.
won in what is it, 1824,
Yeah,
and then 1828 is he actually wins landslide.
yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and
Uh,
it's sad for Adams because I think had his policies actually succeeded,
yeah.
which they couldn't get through Congress, is the main thing.
So
But
do you think then that his impetus at the end of the presidency to run for office again and, and to go back to the House, like to go to the House, that this was a way to sort of reclaim some semblance of, I don't know, staking out his purpose or his drive to do well for the nation,
yeah, I mean, I think
because it
just like
didn't
his
happen during the
dad,
presidency. So,
he's a statesman. I mean, I think he sees himself as necessary. Like
mhm,
needs to be in that role,
Yeah,
like to represent the people he's surrounded by, even as their constituency.
yeah.
Um, I think, yeah, I agree. He's representing the interest of, at the very least, Massachusetts.
Right.
Um,
Well,
and that perspective.
his uh, he- these early presidents, just about all of them, they get quoted uh, on both ends of the religious spectrum.
Yeah,
So Adams is in that camp, where you could take some of his bit of his speech and quote this for a very secular agenda.
yeah,
And on the other end, someone in a very conservative camp could also quote him, maybe even in the same letter or same speech,
right,
to say how Christian he was.
right.
You know what I mean? That's what when I read his writings, it makes me think a lot about that sort of that line that we talked about previously with Washington, and Adams the dad,
Right.
where they're threading that line, threading the needle of that line of between what the government does versus what um, churches or religious institutions do. There is some bleed over a little bit, but I don't think that you could really. I don't think that you can take any of Adams' quotes and make a cogent argument for either one of those positions in those
Right.
extremes.
I think if you take Christianity and you put it on a spectrum, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not talking about denominational spectrum where you have Pentecostals on one end and Catholics on the other, but something like where you would have Christianity, uh, pure belief in Christ on one
Mm-hmm.
end,
Yeah,
and atheism on the opposite end,
yeah,
and maybe deism somewhere in the middle.
yeah, yeah,
I think that Jefferson is the only one that's going to fall on this side of the deism line,
yeah.
whereas Adams, he's going
Yeah,
to be
so the rest of them are
somewhere.
sort of centralized in that spectrum, I would think.
Christ is a figure in his
Yeah,
religion, whatever that may
yeah.
be.
I think John Quincy Adams more so than John Adams.
Right, because he studies
Um,
scripture so
he
much.
does, and his father did too. But I think
Not on the level, not on
no,
the
not
same
on the
level.
same level as John Quincy Adams. He
Yeah.
was way more involved.
I mean, Abigail's influence can't be removed from that.
Yeah, but of course, but he was. So he, on one hand, you have, let's just say, let me maybe pull up this quote here. Um, so he gives a speech about um, it's on July 4th, on the 61st anniversary, 1837, on the 61st anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It says the highest transcendent glory of the American Revolution was this: it connected in one indissoluble bond the principles of civil government with the principles of Christianity. Now, when you examine that, if you look, it depends on your starting point when you look at what he just said to determine the way that if you're trying to get into his mind,
Right.
right? Because on the one hand, some look at that and see, well, see, this is a Christian, it's a founded as a Christian nation. And I would say that I could agree with that if I could define the terms.
Yeah.
Because,
To quote a sermon.
yeah, because I don't think it's that much different than the comments that Jefferson makes, because he was an adherent of the teachings and principles of Jesus. And that is the same framework I think that Adams uses here. However, personally, he talks about these things in a much more religious, personal way that he doesn't do there. I guess he said there's
Yeah.
a separation. In other words, he opposed a theocracy, but thought public morality
Right.
was a necessity. And so you can look at Adams where he says that this has to be,
Right.
the people have to be moral and religious in order for us to run the nation, but we shouldn't be directing the morality. In fact, the idea of the freedom of religion, right? That the First Amendment was integral to make that happen.
I think those folks out there arguing for a Judeo-Christian background,
Mm-hmm.
I think they're going to agree with Adams here. I think that his statement there fits what they're trying to say.
Sure.
However, I
But I
think
think
that
it's taken differently depending on who you. So is one person,
right.
somebody takes this quote and you put it out there on the street to someone who hasn't studied history or read any of the founding documents or their actual works. Sometimes I think that's read as a fundamentalist Christian would read it today,
Right.
or see it.
And that's
And
where
that's the disconnect.
the opposite side of that is the document in question that we're talking about is written by Thomas Jefferson.
Correct.
Now, albeit when Jefferson's writing the Declaration, he's probably a little bit more in the Christian camp than what he is later on.
Yeah.
But being it as Jefferson and how he wrote that,
Yeah.
Christian principles.
Which makes sense with what Adams said, because that's what Jefferson said too.
Who's arguing with that?
Nobody. And that's
you could be a deist, an atheist, anything, and that still works.
Yeah. So later, also, when he's arguing in front of Congress in a speech about an anti-slavery bill, because he produces many of them, which don't go anywhere, as we were talking about earlier. But he says this: it's the duty of man not to be governed by the will of the majority, but by the will of God. And
that is not a deist statement.
No, it is not.
The will of God would not have any role in a deist statement.
Correct. So he does have that to say, and I think that, he's not, I don't think he's not president at that time, but nevertheless, he is a government official.
Right. Well, and he has been president.
And he has been. But his point is that he's arguing that from a personal perspective. And at this point, he's getting fed up with the people ignoring the call, because he sees it as such an affront to decent humanity.
Right.
And
part of the irony in this is, and we kind of have to discuss where this goes forward, is, Southern religion is generally accredited for being a bit more spiritual, which is, in my opinion, a positive thing. Northern, or above the Mason-Dixon line, religion is generally credited as being more socially aware,
right,
and
more about the community, also,
more about
community aspect rather than individualistic mindset.
And I think John Quincy Adams finds the line there that, okay, it's Southerners over here. Yeah, you're spiritual, but what about this?
Yeah,
slavery.
Yeah.
This doesn't belong.
That's right.
It's awkward and it doesn't fit.
I think that's his point too, because if you look at, he's looking, that quote, he's trying to show two different things. He's seeing what he reads in Scripture and the way that he sees the will of God being worked out. And also at the same time, he's looking at the Constitution and the documents of the governing of the U.S., and it doesn't actually afford the majority. The Constitution and the way the government is set up is designed to protect the minority view.
Right.
And in fact, that's the point of the...
Even today, the Electoral College, which was intended to actually make it more elite, actually protects the will of the minority. If you think about how it works, because if it was will of the majority in our modern elections, and no offense to them, but California would run everything.
Yeah.
They have that many people.
Sure.
But because of the Electoral College and the way that it's set up, even though they didn't intend it that way, it does seem to protect.
Well, and it's not just that, it's the sense of I think especially the Bill of Rights, because
absolutely.
If I have the free, because you don't need to protect speech that everybody believes.
Right.
If most people agree with what you say, there would absolutely be no reason to have a law to protect what people say.
Right.
But it's exactly designed to protect whatever the majority doesn't think is right, or they don't think is good.
Well, and then the way it's written too is that Congress cannot pass a law that
Hmm.
will prohibit these
That's
things.
right.
In other words, it's not just we're not just limiting, hey, what you can and can't say. We're saying Congress can't even make a law that would begin to limit this. We're limiting the government,
Yeah,
and that idea of saying we're going to restrain the government, that's what we're actually protecting the people from. It's bad government.
correct.
Hey,
Correct. Which, sometimes I think that the issue of separation of church and state and how that works out, I think we confuse it a lot of times. But if you validate the majority opinion and you enshrine that, try to attempt to enshrine that into law, you violate the very spirit and the nature of what it was intended to do from the beginning.
right? You have mob rule.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You have and they didn't want that. That's why we're a republic, right? Which is different than a straight up democracy. Straight up democracy, everything as soon as you cross that threshold, that's the law. That's the way that it works,
right.
and that can't be. There are certain aspects of our humanity that we don't allow the governing of. Even though, I mean, that's going to come, first, you're going to have blasphemy laws
Right.
and all these other issues that decency laws.
Well, I mean, the system is designed to deal with that, though, because I mean that's the whole idea is that
Mhm.
Congress, the president makes a law.
Mhm.
It turns up that hey, this doesn't sync with the Constitution. The Supreme Court strikes it down.
Right,
It's a
right,
system that's set up to fix that,
yeah,
to literally deal with that.
correct. Um, yeah, I think so that this aspect though of this sense of religious freedom, I think it takes some time at the national level for it to become fully ingrained. And by the time we get to John Quincy Adams, it has been there a sufficient amount of time
Right.
that the most of the state run churches and everything else are falling to pieces or have gone already.
Right.
And which allows dissenting views and opinions, religious minorities to begin to rise.
It's the Protestant Reformation gone broadband,
Essentially,
with no checks on it.
yeah, yeah. And I think some people looking at, say, this time period, I think the 1820s through the about 1880, something like that along those lines, that 60 odd year period spawned the greatest number of cults and offshoots and denominational
Differences,
backwaters and whatever. It happened. There
but
was
even mainline denominations. Yeah,
correct.
even mainline denominations.
It went crazy, and but I do think that was the intent that was there from the beginning, that people could believe what they wished to believe.
Right.
Uh,
Well, you wouldn't have like Ann Hutchinson being forced to go to Rhode Island, or Roger Williams being forced out of Massachusetts, or you know,
are people getting
or
whipped or imprisoned or
yeah,
whatever?
Leland and Danbury
Yeah,
Baptist and all these guys.
I mean the Puritans were hanging Quakers.
Yep.
They hung them, killed them.
Well, didn't burn a few at the stake, I believe.
Yeah, I mean it was
And Quakers are
horrendous.
peaceful.
And so
It's pretty messed
this,
up.
so I think when we talk about I think the hostility that many of the early presidents had toward religion, it was hostility toward the intolerance of other views. It wasn't that they didn't like that somebody had a view about God.
Right.
It was that some people who have a view about God didn't like what somebody else said about God.
The state view, if you will.
Correct.
They wanted to
And
do away with
they
that.
want to do it at the state view, because as soon as you give religion the power of the state, bad things can happen really quickly.
Right.
And I think we know
Almost
that
always do.
they do. And we know that even in the modern era, right? We can think about the various different machinations of things that have happened now. You think about David Koresh, and the various different cults that developed around that. Charles Manson,
I
for
mean,
Pete's sake.
yeah.
So imagine if just say this. This is
I'm
way
not
out
sure we
there,
wanted
but
to bring up the Middle East or not, but I mean,
well, same
let's
thing. The
come to
middle,
that.
sure. Look at the Middle East, right? When you have, you know, religious uh, extremists that becomes the leader of a nation with the justice system and the military and everything else at their back.
Right.
We know how that goes,
Right.
and it doesn't go well. But you imagine for one moment that Charles Manson, right, who really was a Christian cult,
Yeah. Yeah.
because well, he was. I know I
Had
hate to
all the
say that.
racial issues, but
Sure, but they was going to bring about the race war at the end, and it was an Armageddon, and you were going to make this happen for God. Like there was these really odd beliefs. Now, you could say, well, if we wouldn't allow that to begin with, he wouldn't have got there. He would have still got there because this stuff is going on behind the scenes. But what you don't want is for somebody like Charles Manson to be governor of California,
right.
and have the power of the state to enforce a race war.
Right.
Those kinds of that would have been really bad. And I think that's the point of the separation of church and state in that sense, is to protect both.
Right.
Honestly, it's to keep the government from moving too much in one direction or another, that so much so that it hampers our freedom to understand God in the way that we understand God,
Right.
to see God in the way that we see God.
And to keep government dedicated to its purpose, which is to provide us with rights, not provide us with rights, to protect our rights.
Correct.
And to provide us with safety.
Yeah.
Those are the two things. Other than
That's
that,
it.
you don't really need it.
Correct. Yeah, because I mean, what do you do if imagine if you wielded the powers, say, of the federal government today to create new creeds? Like they could be caught up every congressional cycle worried about creating new church creeds for the state, and getting bogged down in those issues and what baptism is and all that. Can you imagine
I don't think we'd be where we are at all.
We wouldn't. We would have gone nowhere, and because those
in the Westward
issues,
movement, arguably, whether or not you see manifest destiny as an actual God-given thing, it wouldn't have occurred.
And I think it's because and this is my opinion about it, but the religious or theological issues in general, most people don't have them by virtue of some majority opinion. They have them because they believe it. The government is designed to be run by the will of the people, which is precisely the opposite of what followers of God would say. People like John Quincy Adams, who would say, things ought to run by the will of God, right? Because theological issues, that's what people are deciding. That's what they're saying, is that I have this foundational belief. So those two things can't work in a republic,
right? But
in the way that works.
That's the nuance of Adams, though. He's saying that each individual would actually have that and be operating by the will of God. And so whoever gets elected, they're going to follow the will of God.
That's right. I think that's what he would have said, and he wouldn't have had a problem with that. Now, I do think he didn't have a problem stating his opinion about what that will is,
right?
Especially
about slavery.
Correct.
Yeah,
and I think especially when it involves the freedom of another individual, right? Because therein the government has stepped into a zone which it shouldn't be involved in.
Right.
Why are we restricting the freedoms of individuals, right? And that, by its very nature, I think John Quincy Adams would have said, is against the will of God.
Right.
How can, if you force somebody to do something, how can someone freely choose whether to follow the will of God or not, or whether to? It doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory,
Yeah, Jefferson and guys would be arguing about like sole competency.
That's right.
Which that's where that's going to fit in.
That's right.
It's the government is set up in such a way to protect rights so that we literally have the freedom, to think as we want and do as we want. And government's here to provide boundaries but not step over them.
That's right. Yeah, you can go this far, no more. But and I think like I said, as we go through these different presidents and we look at sort of the state of the nation and the way that public policy and theology sort of interwove with one another along the way, we see these sort of run-ins where there is a problem,
Right.
and then there's a pulling away from that, and it's usually only just a reaction. The pulling away sometimes goes too far, but it's a reaction like a rubber band. It pulls away because somebody went too far in the other direction.
Yeah.
I think the early presidents did a good job of towing the line.
We have a foundation, to
What's
be
that?
sure. We have a foundation,
Yeah,
and the first 6 absolutely paved that
I think
foundation.
they nailed it. Yeah,
I think we're right to look at it that way, in that we start calling the age of Jackson, excuse me,
yeah.
age of Jackson. That's the first big shift.
Hmm.
I mean, Jeffersonianism, arguably, yeah, but that was kind of already
Yeah.
there. Jacksonian
Well,
views, they're going to be a little different, but they're able to be different because the first 6
just sort of the age of
laid
populism,
that
you'd say.
foundation.
I mean, with Jackson, I mean,
Jackson,
because
the
more
common
people are
man
voting for
movement.
them,
Yeah, the
sure.
common man movement, and the just the rough and ready, like, westward expansion.
Which what most people were at the
That's
time.
what they're doing. The frontier is the
Yeah,
big deal.
and I think they
You
probably
know.
saw themselves in Jackson.
Oh yeah,
He was one of them.
sort of a self-made man, sort of a
Yeah,
rose up from the nothing, and
yeah,
um, we're gonna get into him, but I mean,
yeah. So there's one more detail that I just want to close with it and
okay.
talk about that for a minute whenever we do. But is there anything else that you think we need to bring up as we run
I don't know, man. As
toward
far
the
as his
end?
presidency, it's so
It's
overshadowed
so
by that.
uneventful in the sense
Right.
that
Well, I mean, and it really couldn't be anything more because of all of the flack that came
mhm,
back from that, and
yeah,
it's sort of sad because John Quincy Adams, people don't realize how much he actually did do for the country.
yeah. He seemed to be a good, moral, upright man who wanted to do what was right.
Right.
I do think that, and I think it's obvious
Who
that
got accused of the corrupt bargain?
he
And
did.
yeah,
Which when you look at politics, that's the nature of politics.
I
I think
mean, Christ was accused of blasphemy, so
correct.
you know,
Um, and he spent his last years trying to advocate for the rights of people who couldn't advocate for themselves, slaves,
right.
to free them. Um, and I think that's all that I really could say about his post presidency tenure. He reminds me of um, all the other politics aside, Jimmy Carter post presidency,
There's a
because
lot to be said for that.
Habitat for Humanity and the
I,
working for
I think at the end of the day,
other
Adams
people.
is still a better president.
Yeah,
I mean, he still throws a
yeah. The
better job.
presidency aside, I'm
Yeah,
thinking, but just
the post presidency
the
advocacy
service.
and service. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and because I
I
see him
would say
similar
even
to
more
that.
so because he's actually still involved with the governing of the country
Yeah,
in some way.
correct,
You know.
correct. Um, so the last note, which will tie all this together in a big bow, but it happened at his inauguration.
Okay.
Okay, when we're thinking about a man who is not afraid to talk about the will of God, um, on the House floor to argue a bill, but also say things like, theocracy is wrong and people need to they should be able to say what they want to say, religious freedom, all the rest.
Right.
He was sworn in on a book of law, rather than the Bible,
Hmm.
on purpose. Do you have any comments on
Which book of law?
that? I don't know, actually.
Hmm.
That would be interesting to think about. I don't know if I'm assuming that by that point there may have been legal books written.
Okay. So we
Um,
didn't delve into his personal um, like training and such too much.
no,
Um,
but
He's Harvard Law, if I'm not
Correct.
mistaken,
Correct.
and even excelled at it more than Dad did, I
Hmm.
believe. And so the law was kind of his
Yeah.
ballpark, if you will. I would think that that comes from two places, right? Like, he's not swearing in on a Bible for two reasons. One, he's opposed to the theocracy idea.
Right.
And then the other side of that is he probably has some stipulations in that his own beliefs about uh, not swearing,
Hmm.
about avoiding swearing by the Bible, you know,
Yeah, he could have had some of that.
specifically Christ's teachings about that,
Yeah, and he
you
takes
know.
the oath, like I said, on the book of law. And I think, to me, it seems like the job that he was getting, he wasn't a pastor,
Right,
he was a president. And he was swearing in on the book of which the things that he was supposed to uphold for that oath,
right.
which was
So
the
if
law.
he had actually put his hand on the Constitution, it would have been similar.
Correct.
Right,
Correct. Uh, but I thought that as an interesting tidbit, and especially again as a man who was head of the American Bible Society, uh, and championed the freedom of
well, yeah,
others,
it's
and he based it on Christian principles.
clearly not disliking the Bible. That's
No,
not the issue.
no, he doesn't reject the Bible at that ceremony because he's not a Christian or that he doesn't believe what's in it. He rejects it because he believes that this position is a different position
Right,
than that. That's it.
right,
And that there was this separation of what government's supposed to do and what religion does or what theology does.
right,
Those two things were different spheres, and I think that he saw that very clearly, and that's from day one because he did it when he swore the oath of office.
right.
And I think today, if a president did that, it would be a scandal.
I'd be shocked.
Yeah,
Yeah,
wasn't a scandal then. So, and that tells us something, I think, about the nature of uh, the population and what they thought about that position too, and what it was supposed to be. But I think, like I said before, as we go through the presidents, we're going to find that some of these things start to matter a lot more because of perception, the way that people see things, and the fact that regular people, or at least regular free people, get to vote, men anyway, but not the elite,
right,
are choosing. Those kinds of decisions start to become more of an
right.
issue.
Well, that sounds bad when we say that,
Yeah.
but it was the nature of the beast. And I think if you think about how that opens the door later
Hmm.
for others,
Yeah.
it's important. I
Yeah.
mean, it does lead to better things.
Hmm.
There's rough things in the mean,
Yeah.
but you know,
Yeah. It was a bumpy road. Um, it was a bumpy road, but it's moving in the right direction. So, anyway, that's, I think, fitting to end uh, this conversation, just because of the way that he saw his position and his faith,
right,
and that legacy is, I think, from his dad and from the previous five presidents altogether.
right.
Anyway, so anyway,
Well, to be sure, George Washington, because he names his first son George Washington Adams.
that's right. That's
So,
right. So we're going to close it there, folks. Thanks for joining us. If you liked what you heard, give us a like. Maybe you've got a comment about something, drop that down there also, or subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. So hope to see you guys next time.